Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that 1% of the planet has simply stopped spending. No swipe, no tap, no rent, no tax. What happens then? Within 48 hours, the credit default swap market starts to seize up. Give it a week, and container ships are idling outside ports because no one's signing invoices. By the end of the month, governments, utterly unable to track a single coin, are forced to admit the unthinkable. Our entire economy runs on belief. And that belief? Well, it's completely voluntary. Stick around, because today we're not talking about some abstract market crash or a shadowy conspiracy theory. We're digging into something far more fundamental. One quiet, deeply human choice, the decision to own nothing, to want nothing, that could in fact unravel the whole system faster than any revolution. It's a concept that challenges the very foundations of our consumerist world. Picture a man who looks like he's been living out of a backpack long before it was ever trendy. He's probably repairing his shoes with bicycle tires, cooking a simple meal on a tin can rocket stove, and he greets you with the kind of profound calm only someone with zero notifications to check could possess. He hasn't touched money in 5 years. And it's not because he's poor, it's because he decided currency itself is just a bad story we've all agreed to tell, and never ever question. Call him Leon, or maybe her, Sage. Call them whatever you like, they're multiplying. These folks barter their skills, they sleep in public libraries reading the same dog-eared copy of Thoreau until the pages practically fall out, and they consistently leave every campfire cleaner than they found it. Diogenes, the ancient Greek philosopher, would recognize them instantly, perhaps even nod in approval. Wall Street, on the other hand, has absolutely no file that fits. How do you categorize someone who actively opts out? The media can't quite label them homeless, can they? Because home, for them, is simply wherever they decide to stop for a while. Politicians can't tax them, because honestly, how do you tax zero? And marketers? They can't profile these individuals because they don't browse, they don't swipe, and they certainly don't stream on demand. In a system built on transactions and data, they are, quite literally, the human equivalent of a divide by zero error. They embody a radical form of freedom through simplicity, challenging our ingrained notions of success and material worth. Here's the thing, money isn't just paper or digital bits, it's a remote control. Every single digit in your bank account is, in essence, a tiny vote you cast for the kind of world you want to live in. But what happens when people simply stop pressing those buttons? The remote breaks. One Leon? He's a harmless anecdote, maybe a quirky local legend. 10,000 Leons? Now you've got a statistical glitch, an oddity that raises eyebrows. But once this idea scales to become a critical, visible minority, that's when the real panic reflex kicks in. Why the sudden terror? Because a consumer economy is fundamentally like a stadium wave. Everyone absolutely must stand at the right beat, or the entire illusion collapses. If enough spectators decide to stay seated, the rest of us jumping up and down suddenly look pretty foolish, don't we? Leon is that first spectator, wave after wave, stubbornly staying seated until the cameras finally catch on and zoom in. Psychologists have a term for this, a norm violation. Economists, ever so dry, call it demand evaporation, and bankers, they'll whisper about systemic risk. But all three of those fancy phrases translate to the exact same raw, primal fear, uncontrollability. A person who can't be priced, who can't be nudged, who can't be fined, who can't be marketed to, that's a person who simply can't be governed by the usual levers of society. They represent a radical autonomy that threatens the collective order we've all agreed to. We're constantly taught that economic growth is inevitable, a natural law. But Leon lives proof that contraction, a deliberate stepping back, can also be a conscious choice, and choice, as we all know, can be incredibly contagious. Let's zoom into just one city block for a moment. A local bakery starts noticing a new, unusual pattern. Customers are offering fresh produce, perhaps a hand-sharpened knife, or even an hour of storytelling in exchange for a warm loaf of bread. At first, the baker just laughs it off, but then, the accountant shows last month's ledger. Cash revenue is down 12%, yet the actual calories served are steady. The missing slice of the pie, barter. Down the street, a bike shop joins in. Then a daycare trading childcare for artisanal sourdough. Suddenly, prices start to look negotiable, less like fixed absolutes. A accountants scratch their heads, utterly bewildered. City tax collectors send polite, increasingly frustrated letters that nobody answers, because what exactly do you do with a community that keeps its books on chalkboards erased every week? It's a practical challenge to the very system of monetary exchange. Multiply that microclimate across 3 neighbourhoods, and local GDP starts to shrink visibly. Multiply it across 3 time zones, and headlines scream recession. Even though people are still eating, roofs are still getting repaired, and kids are still being taught. The measurement tool, our beloved GDP, wobbles violently, while life in all its vibrant forms simply goes on. And that's the perverse magic of it all. The economy can appear to collapse, can be declared in crisis, while people are still eating, laughing, and hugging. Once that profound realization truly lands, it's like the emperor has no clothes, and suddenly everyone notices the breeze. This isn't just about individual choice. It's about a potential shift in how value is perceived and exchanged. History, as it often does, gives us the playbook for this kind of challenge. When money stops circulating in the expected ways, authorities first try inconvenience, ticketing campers, confiscating carts, maybe even outlawing sleeping in cars. It's all about making the alternative lifestyle as difficult as possible. Then come the narratives. Powerful stories designed to paint Leons as nothing more than freeloaders, as mental cases, or as outright threats to all the hard-working taxpayers who just play by the rules. If stigma fails to work its magic, laws inevitably tighten. You'll see curfews implemented, anti-loitering ordinances popping up, even bans on sharing food in public parks, anything and everything to criminalise the absence of transaction. Why? Because a visible alternative, a different way of living, is often far more dangerous than a hidden crime. It reminds onlookers that opting out, that choosing a different path, is actually possible. Sometimes, the system even tries absorption. Corporate brands launch off-grid product lines, banks try to sell minimalist investment portfolios. They attempt to brand rejection itself, to commodify the very act of opting out. But you can't monetize zero, can you? So eventually, that effort flops. The harder, more insidious players' surveillance. Think digital IDs, programmable central bank currencies, or even universal basic income tied to approved behaviour. If cash is data, then a refusal to spend, a complete withdrawal from the monetary system, becomes traceable dissent, a political act that questions the legitimacy of institutions. Yet, each and every one of these reactions, these attempts to control, advertises the same fundamental truth. The strongest adhesive holding our intricate social order together isn't gold, it isn't guns, and it isn't oil. It's a shared story. And stories, thankfully, can be rewritten faster than parliaments can even convene. Here's where we hold up the uncomfortable mirror. Most of us deep down actually dislike our own reliance on money. We chafe under its demands. But we also fear losing that one universally trusted yardstick we use to compare effort, to measure worth, to signal status. Take away the dollars and suddenly we're exposed, aren't we? Is my hour of coding genuinely more valuable than your hour of elder care? We simply don't have a common language for that kind of debate, so we let the market speak for us, however imperfectly. Leon, by his very existence, forces that conversation. He claims that true value is relational, negotiated in real time between people, not some abstract number stored in an asset column. He suggests that genuine security could in fact come from a strong interconnected community, rather than from relentless accumulation. And he proves, day after quiet day, that you can wake up without an alarm, without a calendar full of appointments, without an invoice hanging over your head, and still contribute meaningfully to the world around you. The terror isn't that Leon will steal your job. It's far more unsettling than that. It's the chilling realization that you might never have needed that job to begin with, only the paycheck it provided. And once that thought takes root, once it anchors itself in your mind, the whole construct of our lives starts to wobble. Our pensions, our sprawling suburbs, our crushing college debt, the endless status treadmills we've been running on. The entire script we've rehearsed since kindergarten suddenly starts to sound oddly improvised, like a play where the actors have forgotten their lines. It's a profound challenge to our psychological comfort zones and our societal norms. If this conversation is making you rethink your next impulse purchase, or even just glance differently at your wallet, then hit pause on scrolling and absolutely smash that subscribe button. We're about to dive even deeper into why governments quietly fear a barter comeback more than any hostile army. Let's take a quick trip back in time. Henry David Thoreau, that famous American essayist, famously refused to pay a poll tax that was funding the Mexican-American War. He spent just one night in jail, but the local constable, clearly annoyed by the inconvenience, quietly paid the fee for him and let him out. Thoreau's point landed anyway, loud and clear. Governments need money far more than they need blind obedience. Deny them the coin, and their elaborate machinery stalls. This echoes the practical threat posed by widespread refusal to participate monetarily. Then there's Diogenes, living in his barrel, a living, breathing challenge to the opulent Athens of his day, showing everyone that civilized life was mostly just props and pretense. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the world, offered him anything he desired, Diogenes famously replied, "Move out of my sunlight." 2,000 years later, that sentence still rings with incredible power, doesn't it? Because it exposes power's fundamental dependence on audience participation, on our collective consent to its authority. Fast forward to the Great Depression, when thousands of small towns, faced with a vanished official currency, issued local scrip, essentially IOUs for eggs, for fence painting, for babysitting. Life, remarkably, found a way. The lesson repeated itself in 2008 when collapsing banks froze credit, and Greek villages, out of necessity, revived ancient barter networks. Each time, without fail, authorities rushed to prop up the national currency, terrified that citizens might just notice that life, in all its richness, continues perfectly well without it. They fear the psychological shift that occurs when people realize alternative systems are viable. Critics naturally love to trot out one rebuttal. Barter is clunky. You can't run MRI machines on zucchini. And you know what? They're absolutely right to a point. But here's the kicker. Most of us rarely, if ever, interact directly with MRI machines. What we do interact with day in and day out are hunger, loneliness, and the need for entertainment. And those fundamental needs? They are very much solvable by neighbours, by community gardens, by shared stories. What happens at scale, then, isn't some total utopian abandonment of money. Instead, we might see a bimodal economy emerge. High-tech, capital-intensive industries, those that truly need complex financial structures, would stay monetized. Meanwhile, everyday reproduction, our food, our shelter, our culture, our immediate community needs, would shift into a relationship-based exchange system. The boundary between these two modes would keep moving inward, shrinking the taxable, the advertisable, the easily controlled core of our lives. At that tipping point, governments would effectively lose the very ledger they rely on to provision armies, to service sovereign debt, or to bail out banks. 1 Leon? He's a rounding error, easily ignored. But 10 million Leons? That's not just a statistical anomaly. That's a sovereign debt crisis wearing a knowing, peaceful smile. It's a practical and political threat to their operational capacity. So, the man who rejects money terrifies society not because he is violent or radical in the traditional sense, but because he simply withdraws consent. He demonstrates, powerfully, that the greatest power citizens hold isn't in their purchasing decisions, it's in their abstaining. Every wallet closed, every deliberate choice not to participate in the consumer cycle, is a profound vote of no confidence in the overarching story we've all inherited. And stories ultimately end when the listeners stand up and quietly leave the room. Leon already walked out. The only real question left for us is how many of us will glance, perhaps longingly, at that exit door. If you want more videos that poke at the comfortable assumptions of modern life, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Is Leon a hero, a parasite, or perhaps the canary in our collective coal mine? Let's argue politely, shall we? Money, at its very core, was supposed to be our servant, a smooth lubricant for cooperation and trade. But somewhere along the way, it morphed into the master script, dictating our every move, our every aspiration. The man who owns nothing, who wants nothing, reminds us that this script is in fact entirely optional, and that above all else terrifies those who are busy selling tickets to the next act. So, the next time you feel that familiar twitch to check your balance, to see what you've got, ask yourself a deeper question. Am I truly measuring my freedom, or am I perhaps mortgaging it away? The answer to that question might just decide whether Leon remains a fringe tale, a quirky anecdote, or whether he becomes the compelling prologue to a completely new story for all of us.